I have to follow these two females in my family, and it's a hard act to follow. But I want to look back a little bit on Chris's life for you. As my wife has said, he started in T-ball, and he started before he started kindergarten. We went through at least 14 years of baseball, from the rec teams, traveling teams, to the Halls High School baseball team. And we traveled with the traveling teams to national championship tournaments in a number of cities, New Orleans, Minneapolis, Orlando, and a number of other cities. We had a wonderful time and met wonderful people during those years, and they'll never be forgotten. In his room, he accumulated 31 trophies. They're sitting on 2 dressers, along with 4 medallions showing his achievements in the baseball field. I go up to his room from time to time, but you know, to me, that room is empty, regardless of how many trophies or ribbons are there. In his room, there's still 23 blue ribbons that were awarded to him for first place finishes from the Bricky Elementary field days. All those ribbons he pinned on his grandmother Gray, who sat so proudly in the hot sun, cheering him on. Grandma Gray now resides in a nursing home as a result of a stroke that she suffered shortly after Chris's death. But she has a picture of Chris and Shannon sitting in her room on the windowsill. And you better not move that picture. There's been a couple of aides at that nursing home that's been chewed out royally because they moved that picture something like an inch to the left to make room for a floral bouquet. She looks at that picture as she sits in her wheelchair. And like I say, that picture better not be moved from where she has it sitting. She knows exactly where it sits, and when she looks over there and that picture's been moved, you better watch out. Chris would have been a great father, I believe, based on the fondness that he showed for his nieces and nephews, as my wife and daughter has said. They were very fond of him. And when they'd come over, busting through the doors, yelling and carrying on as they normally did, first question they'd ask, is Uncle Chris here? And if the answer was yes, up the stairs they went to his bedroom. Grandma and Grandpa was normally secondary if he was home. Now they're left with a total emptiness and sadness, and I have been deprived of spoiling his kids. While still in high school, Chris joined the Young Life group of Halls High School. He attended Windy Gap summer sessions, sponsored by the Knox County Young Life organization, for 2 straight years. And he was actually going back the 3rd year to serve as a counselor. And for some reason, I don't know what happened, but that didn't, he got more involved with baseball, or his grades needed additional attention. On his return, he joined the Beaver Dam Baptist Church in Halls. This is where his funeral was held, and friends were received for around 7 hours on that date. Floral arrangement that we had on his casket contained 4 of his favorite caps that he wore. His guest book has remained open and has been paid for by some of our loyal family friends. Number of pages number more than 100. As my wife has said, he had artistic talent that was quite apparent in his earlier years. He won the Halls Middle School Gallery Award with that charcoal sketch that was entitled Human Still Life. And this hung in the school for several years until we recently retrieved it because we didn't know for sure what would happen to it. And it now hangs in our home. After he received the certification as a mechanic for the motorcycle and watercraft at the American Motorcycle Institute in Daytona Beach, Florida, Chris started working for this repair shop in Oak Ridge. Here he became friends with a young black kid that was still in high school, and he came there in the afternoons to work. Travis, this young man, had no transportation, so Chris would take him to his home in the Scarborough Village there, a predominantly black community, after the shop would close each night. He even brought him home for dinner one night. Later, when Chris met his untimely death, this young man hitched a ride with friends to get to Chris's funeral. I'll never forget the sad expression that kid had on his face. I passed along to my son what I've considered something my parents taught me that was very important in bringing up children. And Chris stuck with it without any variation. You don't talk about someone who's deceased unless you can say something nice, because they cannot defend themselves, and the story may be totally different. As we say today there are two sides to everything. Chris would hardly say anything bad about anyone. I remember him admonishing me one day when I said something about one of his friends, and I'll never forget that conversation. He was putting Armor All on his truck tires, and he must have used gallons of that stuff down through the years because those tires were shiny and black. And I said something about one of his friends while he was putting Armor All on his tires, and he looked up at me and he said, "Dad, you don't have to say things like that about him because my friends had a rough time." I'll never forget that conversation. Chris's friends did honor his memory during their weddings, and he was honored at his brother's wedding with a large portrait that sat at the altar. And as the sun shone through that window, it blanked out all of the photographic equipment's ability to compensate for sunlight. We looked over there, and the beams of that sun were shining on his portrait. One of his co-workers with Bailey and Fry Construction Company told us he never wanted to forget Chris. He named his son Ryland Christopher, born after Chris's death. Let me make sure that you understand Chris was not a saint, and I don't believe we've ever tried to leave that impression. However, he's never been charged with any major offenses. And I know Chris was scared to death knowing what was happening to him. However, I know beyond any doubt that he drew his last few breaths, that cold mud caked on his bottoms of his feet from having to walk through that field to his execution spot, that his concern was for Shannon with a C. I know that hurt him far more than any of those 3 bullets, that tore into his body. In the outline I've tried to follow in writing this impact statement, it mentions allowance for stating monetary losses I've suffered. Since January the 7th of 2007, I've turned down job offers as a consultant, subcontractor, whichever one you prefer to refer to it as, to remain close to my family and attend every court hearing, which numbers right now well over 100. This has resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost income. But you know, this really doesn't bother me anymore. If I could have my son back for just a short period of time and tell him how much I loved him, I'd give all the money, all the property I have, and would ever earn in the future, and go live in the street. That's how much I miss him. The hurt, the heartbreak, the extreme loss of a wonderful child, like my family and I have had to do, and endure, and then realize also the pain and suffering that he had to go through during his last few seconds on earth. I'd like to close, and I borrowed this quote from Jake Mabey, who writes for the Hall Shopper. He coined this phrase while doing an article honoring Chris, which included some of his baseball achievements, and he used a lot of baseball lingo in the process, and statements from friends as how much they thought of Chris. I'd like to close with that. No one can hurt Chris Newsom anymore. And he doesn't even have to run real fast around third base to beat the throw to home plate, because Chris Newsom is safe at home. Thank you.